Hi friends, thanks for joining me. Are you ready to dig into the next book of the Bible? We are still in the Old Testament. We are still way before Jesus was born. I have my bookmark right here. We're going to the next book. Do you know what that book is called? It's called Exodus. Wonder what Exodus means. It has a word in there that sounds familiar to me. Can you figure out what Exodus means? We're going to meet somebody named Moses, and Moses is a big part of God's story. And in the book of Exodus, it tells how Moses was born and how Moses was saved by the exact enemy of the people who Moses belonged to. And then it talks about how Moses talked to God in the most unusual way, through a burning bush in the middle of the desert. Exodus brings us to the point of this story. It's called Let My People Go. You see, the people of God, the Israelites, they were in Egypt and they were slaves. They had to work for the Pharaoh, who was the big king in Egypt. And the Pharaoh did not treat people very well. Let's read out of our Bible to see what's going on in Let My People Go. Let my people go. That's what Moses said as he stood in front of the Pharaoh. He was probably very nervous. He didn't want to be in Egypt. He wanted to go back home to the desert with his sheep and his wife and his kids. But there he was standing in front of Pharaoh, saying exactly what God told him to say. Let my people go. And do you know what Pharaoh said? He said no. Rats. Okay, it was time for a neat trick with the big scary stick snake. So Moses threw down his walking stick and boom! God turned it into a snake and then back into a stick. Let my people go, he said. And Pharaoh said no. Double rats. Then God told Moses it was time to do even more powerful than a stick snake. So he began to send the plagues, one at a time, to show Pharaoh just how powerful God was. A plague is a really bad thing, like bugs or a bad rash or a big storm, stuff that you don't want happening in your town. God told Moses to dip his walking stick into a big river in Egypt. The river was called the Nile. When his stick touched the water, all the water turned to blood. Let my people go, Moses said once again, and Pharaoh said no. Then God said to Moses, hold up your stick. We're going to make frogs. And boom! Frogs, millions of them. Everywhere. The fields were covered with frogs, the roads covered with frogs. There was frogs in people's houses in their beds. Let my people go, Moses said, trying not to step on a frog. And Pharaoh said, no. Next, God sent gnats, tiny little bugs that got everywhere. Then flies, zillions and zillions of flies. And then sickness that killed all the farm animals. Next, all the Egyptians got sores on their skin, itchy, ouchy sores all over. There was hail, big balls of ice that fell from the sky and knocked down all the corn and wheat and rice plants. And then locusts, big bugs that looked like grasshoppers that ate all of the food that wasn't killed by the hail. Each time, Pharaoh said no. These plagues, the frogs, the flies, the locusts, and the hail, they weren't enough, so God turned out the lights. Egypt actually went dark. It was middle of the night dark, but it was in the middle of the day. The Egyptians couldn't see anything. Let my people go, Moses said to Pharaoh. At least he thought he was talking to Pharaoh. It was so dark it was hard to tell, but a voice from the darkness said, no. Finally, God knew exactly what he would have to do to change Pharaoh's mind. God told Moses it was time for the Egyptians to know how powerful God was. I am going to send an angel who will kill all of the oldest sons of the Egyptians, God said, and then Pharaoh will let my people go. Moses thought hard about this terrible thing. "How will the angel know which sons are children of Israel?" Moses asked. God gave Moses a sign. Each Israelite family was to prepare a lamb for a special meal and take some of the blood of the lamb and put it over the door of their house. When the angel saw the blood of the lamb on the door, the angel would pass over that house. Moses and the Israelites were unsure, but they followed God's directions. They put the blood of the lamb over their doors and they ate a special meal, which is now called the Passover meal. They did everything just the way God had said, and then they went to bed, but they didn't get much sleep. That night, the angel passed right through all the streets of Egypt, and in the morning, all of the oldest sons of the Egyptians were dead. The Egyptian moms and dads cried and cried. Even the Pharaoh cried because his son died too. It was terrible. When he was done crying, Pharaoh called for Moses. Can you guess what he said? He said, "Go." God showed the Egyptians just how powerful God was. God showed the children of Israel that he heard their cries and that God would keep promises, the promises made to their father Abraham. After 400 years in Egypt, the Israelites finally were free. Can you imagine how they would feel? It wasn't easy. Immediately they ran into trouble. God showed up to help. The Red Sea was in their way of their escape, so God pushed the water aside and they walked right through. They had no food to eat, so God sent birds for meat and really weird flaky stuff called manna for bread. They had no water to drink, so God told Moses to hit a rock with his stick, and boom, a water fountain appeared right from the rock. Even then, God was with them. God gave them everything they needed. Wow, that was a really crazy story. Have you heard that story before? What I need to remember from that story is that I need to trust God, that God will help me. Even in the sad or scary or crazy parts of my life, God is with me. All I need to do is talk to God. Let's see what Buck Denver says about this book of Exodus.
The second book of the Bible is Genesis, Exodus. Exodus is a story of the Israelites in Egypt and Moses and the Red Sea and God's rescue plan really kicking into gear. Let's hear a song about it. Chuckwagon?
I took a bus from Texas just to sing a song about Exodus, the story of the Israelites enslaved. Until a man named Moses who did just what God had told him to, and Jacob's sons and daughters all were saved. Oh, Texas bus, take me on an Exodus, way beyond this mess and fuss. Take me to the promised land, and we'll discuss what we learned in Exodus about the burning bush and the one who saved his children from the grip of Pharaoh's hand. I took a bus from Texas just to sing a song about Exodus. Now it's done, it's time to head back home. Nice song. But what kind of a word is Exodus anyway?
We can explain that. Pastor Paul?
The word Exodus comes from the Greek word exodos, meaning a going out or departure. Exodus means you're leaving. Time for me to make a bit of an exodus myself, Winifred.
Where are you going?
To the bathroom. Too much tea.
Hurry back.
I can't make any promises. So who's leaving, and where are they leaving from? And why? And where are they going?
Oh, I see we have lots of questions today. Magic Flannel Graph, let's help them out. The book of Genesis ended with Joseph bringing his dad Jacob and all his brothers to Egypt to live, to save them from a famine. Well, they all liked Egypt, so they stayed. 100 years later, Jacob's grandkids and great-grandkids and great-great-grandkids numbered in the thousands. 100 years after that, they numbered in the tens of thousands. After another 100 years, well, you see where this was going. As Exodus begins, Egypt has a new king called the Pharaoh, who didn't know anything about Jacob or Joseph and wasn't real wild about all these foreigners popping up everywhere. He was afraid these Hebrews, as they called the children of Jacob, might rise up one day and take over Egypt. So he made them slaves and had them work hard making bricks and building cities for him. But still, Jacob's kids had even more kids, so Pharaoh did something terrible. He said that all new Hebrew babies that were boys should be thrown into the Nile River and drowned. Isn't that awful? But Exodus is about God's promises to Abraham, that his children would be a great nation that would have its own land and bless the whole earth. And God never forgets his promises.
It seems like that rescue plan is a little bit stuck.
Yes, for almost 400 years, the children of Israel, that's what we call them because Israel was the new name God gave Jacob, the children of Israel seemed stuck in Egypt. Abraham's descendants were certainly multiplying, but they weren't getting their own land, and they were slaves. But God was about to get his rescue plan back in gear, as it's time to meet one of the most important people in the Bible and in all of history, a guy named Moses. Have you heard of him?
Who's Moses?
Well, I don't really know the whole thing.
Moses obeyed God when he talked to God, which was in a burning bush. He sent his voice down into a burning bush, and it just didn't burn. It wouldn't burn. So Moses knew that it was some holy bush.
He lifted up his staff and God parted the Red Sea so that the Israelites could go through.
By the power of God, it helped. He helped him do that when he said, "Throw down your staff, stab your staff." It included his staff a lot, I'll tell you that.
This is a story about a boy. His name was Moses, and it brought his mom such joy. She had to hide him, it makes me shiver, to keep old Pharaoh's men from throwing him in the river.
A Hebrew baby was born and hidden in a reed basket at the edge of the Nile River. And who should find him but Pharaoh's own daughter, who adopted him and named him Moses. He was raised in the royal palace, but still knew he was a Hebrew, a child of Israel. And one day, when he saw an Egyptian beating another Hebrew, he got so mad he sorta overreacted.
Did he call him a name?
No. He killed him.
He what?
Yep. He killed the Egyptian.
Well, that couldn't have gone over very well.
No, it didn't. When Pharaoh found out, he said Moses had to die, and so Moses did what most sensible people would do.
What's that?
He took off running.
And now he's running for his life, out to the desert where he finds himself a wife.
Her name's Zipporah.
And now he's hiding out with his sheep, 'cause he knows back in Egypt he's in trouble deep.
Now, you probably know this story. So Moses is in the desert when God shows up in a bush.
Wait, God is in a bush?
Well, he's speaking through a bush. Not an ordinary bush, though. It's burning. That makes it more dramatic.
Right, I can see where that would make it more dramatic. Right, more dramatic than a regular bush. But what if the bush was a dancing bush or a juggling bush? That'd be dramatic, wouldn't it? Let's stay focused. Sorry.
Ahem. So God tells Moses to go back to Egypt and tell Pharaoh to let his people go. And Moses says, "I don't want to." And God says, "I want you to." And Moses says, "I can't." And God says, "You can." And Moses says, "Will you come with me?" And God says, "Of course I will." And so Moses goes back to Egypt to face down Pharaoh.
This is a story about a man who faced a stubborn king that didn't understand that when you park your stubborn self right in God's way, let's just assume you're gonna have a lousy day. Oh, there were gnats and frogs, and the river turned to blood, and there were flies and boils, and the cows fell with the thud, and then the locusts came and ate up all the crops, and there was hail and darkness, but he wouldn't stop saying no.
Did you ever come up with a word that reminded you of the name of the book of Exodus? It reminds me of an exit sign. Exodus, exit. So that's what I did for my craft. And I wrote, God is always with me, even when I exit. God helped the people, the Israelites, leave Pharaoh, leave their life that was slavery, where they had to work for free, where they were treated badly, where Pharaoh was mean to them. They got to leave, and God helped them out. Because in this story, I remember that God will help me out of any situation I need out of. I just need to remember to talk to God, share God's love with others, and I know you can do that too. Well, my friends, I will see you next week for another exciting story out of our big book of stories, the Bible. Bye-bye.